I want to talk about, since I've been slamming the American left a little bit today, I need to slam the American right a little bit today. And I want to show you the amount of brain cells that the anti-interventionist, quote unquote, these isolationists, more like, Republican right is dealing with right now. The type of intelligence and thought that is going into their decisions to stop sending aid to Ukraine. So this is Representative Rosendale. Representative Rosendale is a Republican representative from the state of Montana, and he voted against sending more aid to Ukraine. He's one of, I think, about half of the Republican House members who voted with a recent bill, I believe it was a Matt Gaetz initiative, against sending aid to Ukraine. And he wanted to explain his vote on CNN. They brought him on to talk about not sending any more aid to Ukraine and why the I'm not going to even call it the fringes of the Republican Party, but why the isolationist faction of the Republican Party no longer wants to send aid to Ukraine. They brought him on to explain his position, and his position was, we are helping destroy a nation and kill people. That's in reference towards Ukraine, that we're helping to kill Ukrainians by giving them the means to fight against the invader that's dumping them in mass graves. Then Jim, who's the CNN host, replies, how is Ukraine destroying its own country? By defending itself. And he does not have a good response. Let's listen.
We are helping destroy a nation and kill people.
Who's destroying the nation? Russia
Both
invaded.
sides.
How is Ukraine destroying its own country by defending itself from an invasion?
Look, both sides are being funded by other countries, okay? They're providing ammunition.
One to defend itself and one to invade another country. That's fundamentally different.
Sure. And if we don't push them towards a peace accord, it's going to continue, Jim. And I, for one, don't want to participate in continuing to see Ukrainians get killed, to see.
I wonder, is the stance really that it's both sides' fault because both sides sent weapons? If that's the stance, right? If that's the stance, then does that mean at any time we sent, like, and I know World War II comparisons are overplayed, but when we send weapons to the United Kingdom, was that just dragging it out? And you want to know what? There were people like this at the time. There were people like this at the time. Where was it? There were people like this at the time that made this exact argument about this. Like, oh, all you're going to do is prolong the war, and the more you arm the British against the dominant, powerful Germans, all you're doing is really getting those British people killed. You're prolonging it. Hitler has not attacked us. Why attack Hitler? Now, if this was a war where there was a reasonable settlement that could be found at the moment, or the Russians were willing to leave Ukraine, the Russians were willing to not restrict the property rights of those who don't accept Russian citizenship, not deport them, not arrest them, not steal their homes and place colonial settlers in there, practicing settler colonialism, engaging in a campaign of ethnic cleansing as they adopt dissidents and Ukrainian civilians in mass graves. Over 440 bodies dumped in a mass grave in Izium, only 22 of those bodies being military, men, women, and sadly children. Not everything is again, I keep using the word flower child. Not everything can be saved like flower children hugging each other. Not everything can be solved that way. I would think that Republicans of all people would know this. That not everything can be saved with a pat on the head, a high five, and saying we can all get along. That sometimes you need to stand up for yourself and defend your freedom. Freedom isn't free. But apparently this representative has forgotten that.
Ukraine's soil be destroyed.
The Ukrainians want to defend themselves from that, and they're asking for help to do it. How does it help them for them to defend themselves? They're fighting to defend themselves from that invasion.
There's a lot of Ukrainians that would sit down and be really glad to come to the table. And
there's a lot of Ukrainians that would be very happy to sit down and come to the table. There's nothing wrong with coming to the table and negotiating, but the Ukrainians did that for weeks at the start of the war. They have publicly posted their 10-point plan for peace already. That's known. They have gone to conferences with Saudi Arabia, with China, with the UAE and other partners around the world to try to put forward their peace plan and talk about how they can come to a settlement in this war. But the Russian position is they get to keep all the land they conquered, and the Ukrainians have to disarm themselves. So, and they don't say this part out loud, but anyone with 2 brain cells would recognize it, so it would be easier for them to invade them again, just like they did with the Chechens. Just like they did with the Ukrainians in 2014, they did with them then again in 2022, and if this guy got his way, they'd be doing it again in 2028.
Sit down and have a discussion about a peace accord too, Jim.
Also, none of the polling data at all aligns with this man's position. None of the Ukrainian polling data.
I guarantee you.
No, that's certainly not where the public support is in that country for this war,
Well,
or for their president.
The public support isn't here in our country to continue to support an unending war.
The majority of Americans still support aid to Ukraine. And I'm sorry, we were in Afghanistan for how many years? It was like 21 years. We were in Afghanistan for the entirety of my life. And this statement of an unending war, of the never-ending war, we're not even 2 years in, and it's already a never-ending war after we got out of a 21-year war. Is it just any war that isn't like a week long is now a never-ending war? Was World War II a never-ending war? Was every war that wasn't a month long a never-ending war? Some wars are long. Some wars take effort. Ukraine have surmounted impossible odds, standing up against what was supposed to be the second most powerful nation in the world. Standing up against their air force, against their armored corps, destroying over 50% of their armored reserves, pushing them back, liberating over 50% of the territory they've conquered since 2022. It's incredible. But we can't expect the Ukrainians to pull off a miracle every single day. For every single D-Day, there's going to be an Operation Market Garden. These things take time.
That we don't have any policy plans or program laid out in what our goals are.
I understand that, and I know you've been very strong on China. Every intelligence official I've spoken to in this country and in Europe and in Asia, by the way, I went to Taiwan earlier this summer, says that China is watching for how the world responds to Ukraine to make a judgment as to how the world would respond if it were to invade Taiwan. Why would it be a good thing to let Russia gain territory in Ukraine? Wouldn't that send a signal to China that, hey, it might get away with an invasion of Taiwan?
I'll tell you what does send a signal to China. That is canceling the Keystone XL pipeline.
What the fuck? What was that response? He just pretended he didn't get asked the question. He doesn't know how to respond to it because it's a good question. It's a good question that he asked. Like, hey, why? What if what you're saying the Chinese are looking at? What if the Chinese are looking at this? If they were to invade Taiwan, why would it be a good thing to give the Russians all this land? Which is what I assume you would propose if you would enforce a peace deal right now and you were to freeze the contact line. And instead of answering the question, which he could have said, look, he could have tried to downplay how much the Chinese are looking into it. He could have tried any sort of response. Just flat out rejected the premise he could have. But no, he just avoided it and then started talking about a completely separate issue.
Canceling the
what a dingbat.
Sanctions that we had on the Nord Stream 2 gas line. Taking our national debt, taking our national debt, which is at $33 trillion, and adding another $3 trillion a year to it so that China and Russia can get together and work with the Saudis to use a different petrodollar than the U.S. currency, watching BRICS get together and make a decision about whether they want to utilize another reserve currency.
Okay, to be clear, 59% of the world's reserve currency is American dollars. The next biggest competitor is the euro. That's 20%. So that means 59 plus 20. We're talking 79% of the world's reserve currency are the American allies. Next one, it's the yen. Okay? The Japanese yen. And so now you're over 80% of the world's reserve currency being either America or American allies. Then I think it's the Chinese. Then it's the Canadians and the Australians, and then it's everybody else. The Chinese don't agree with the Russians on making a world reserve currency. They think that instead people should trade in local currencies, while the Russians want a world reserve currency, and guess what they think it should be? The ruble. The same ruble that they artificially try to engage in price controlling of, which if you're going to get the world to agree to your currency being the world reserve currency, artificially manipulating it is not a good way to encourage that. Not a great way to encourage that. Also, engaging in these types of invasions is not a good way to encourage that either, but certainly artificial manipulation of your currency is not a good way either. Blocking people from trading your currency on public markets, and so they have to go into underground illegal markets, is also not a good way of encouraging people to adopt your currency as a world reserve currency. I'm not saying that BRICS is like completely worthless or anything. I think that some of the main work they've done is probably with developmental banks, even if it's 95% Chinese funded, and it's mostly just the Chinese Development Bank of BRICS at this point. But at the moment, I don't understand how we could possibly say that sending more aid to Ukraine is at all going to undermine our reserve currency, or is going to undermine the American dollar, or is going to assist the Russians. I don't understand how the Russians falling on a sword in Ukraine and us pushing that sword deeper into them is going to make their currency stronger. The ruble is worth less than an American penny now. And that has happened through the war in Ukraine. Does this guy know anything about the war? This is an elected representative from Montana. And his answer to the war in Ukraine is the Ukrainians don't really want to fight anymore, which is a lie. And when he's asking about all the horrible things that, the Russians have done and why the Ukrainians want to fight against it, it's just sure, whatever. But, there's Ukrainians who agree with me. Are there? Can you find one? Do you know one? Have you spoken to a Ukrainian before? Has he been to Ukraine? Does he know anything about the history or history of struggle of this country? No, he doesn't. He doesn't know anything. He just knows that there's a lot of people on Twitter and a lot of people either pumped full of misinformation or just engaging in just blanket isolationism that really likes the idea of abandoning Ukraine to traditional Christian Russia. And so he has decided to be against Ukraine aid. That's it. He's not put any thought into it deeper than that. He hasn't. Trying to advertise this as a humanitarian issue, which is what he's doing. Like, I really know what's best for the country more than those Ukrainians. Not only is it American-centric, not only is it egotistical, not only is it short-sighted and honestly dingbat behavior, it just doesn't make any sense. Listen to the Ukrainians. Don't speak over them. Don't speak for them, especially if you don't know what they want. I don't think this guy really understands the conflict that much. Once he was put under the most bare minimum of pressure from the journalists saying, how would it be a good thing to give them this land? The Ukrainians are asking for these weapons. He just dodged the question, moved on to something else, started rambling about the XL Keystone Pipeline because he didn't know how to answer some tough questions. Because I don't think he particularly thought about these questions.